3:20 p.m. In the first part of this, and we'll take a 10-minute break there, and then we'll start in again about 3:30, and we'll go until 5, and then we'll come to our dinner break. So let's pick up where we left off. I was talking about brain structure and human behavior and how these two things are completely interrelated. Brain health plays a critical role in human behavior, so it is extremely important for human beings to become familiar with the brain's basic structure and function. Now, I'm not telling you that this is the totality of neuroscience, what I'm going to show you here today. I'm saying that this is the basics. It's the essence of how the brain structure works. So this is part of understanding the physiological aspects of how consciousness works, all right? So there's three main complexes, structures, that comprise the total human brain. The first is the R complex, or the reptilian brain. So this part of the brain facilitates basic survival functions. It's the part of the brain that goes to work and becomes active when we're in what's called fight or flight mode, okay? When survival is at stake. It also controls basic motor functions and respiration, okay? The second part of the brain is above the R complex. This is called the limbic system. It's also known as the mammal brain, the mammalian brain. This part of the brain facilitates human emotions, and it makes human emotion possible to be felt in the physiology. It does this by releasing what's known as neuropeptides into the bloodstream through different glands that comprise the limbic brain, or what's called the midbrain also. So the final part of the brain, the highest structure structurally, and the newest part of the brain evolutionarily, it's called the neocortex. Now really what this part of the brain is really called is the telencephalon. That's what we traditionally think of as the gray matter of the brain, okay, with the hemispheres, okay. The neocortex is where all of the actual electrochemical activity that comprises our human modes of thought takes place, and that's in the outer shell of the telencephalon, which is known as the neocortex. So this part of the brain actually facilitates all human functions of thought, what we consider the things in thought that make us a human being and separate us from the animal kingdom. Higher thought functions, logic, intuition, creativity, okay? So we'll break down these parts of the brain and give you some visual understanding of them. So down here, down here is the reptilian brain. It's comprised of the brain stem right here, and this part of the brain is called the cerebellum, okay? These two components together essentially comprise the R complex. So again, the R complex is the lowest consciousness part of the brain. We don't do any thinking with this part of the brain. It's the reactive part of the brain. It reacts to stimulus. It's the stimulus response mechanism. Now up here in this middle part of the brain, these are all the different glands like the hypothalamus, the thalamus, the pituitary and pineal glands, etc., that comprise the midbrain or the limbic system. All human emotions are facilitated, are made possible by this part of the brain, okay? So this part of the brain, if it wasn't working properly, you would not be able to experience a normal range of human emotions. This is part of what psychopathy is. Psychopaths, this part of the brain is not functioning properly, whether it be from a birth disorder or whether it be from conditions over one's life that if someone has stayed in chronically has numbed out this part of the brain and it is not functioning properly anymore, so the person's not actually experiencing a normal range of emotions. This part of the brain, which again is the telencephalon, this gray matter part with all of the grooves, etc., that's the neocortex. The neocortex is the outer casing, basically, of the telencephalon, the higher brain. It's the human brain, okay? Neo means new, so it's the newest part of brain structure as far as evolutionary development of the human being goes. So this part of the brain facilitates all higher order thinking. Now, what you have to understand about the telencephalon, or the hemispheres of the brain, is that they're first of all bilaterally symmetrical, and they generally control different functions of thought. Now, I'm not telling you it's 100%. Neuroscience is more complicated than that, okay? But in general, the left hemisphere of the brain is what governs logic, analytical thought, and scientific and mathematical thinking, and also linear thought processes, okay? Physical world tasks and details, being able to break things down and analyze them, all right? So this is taking things apart, breaking them down into smaller components and analyzing the pieces. That's what the left brain does. You could look at it as a series processor, okay? It has to go into this part first, then here, and then we could spit out the output. A linear process, like a series processor, okay? The right side of the brain, the right hemisphere, governs or generally facilitates and makes possible human creativity, our emotional makeup, okay, all the emotional dynamics of the human being, holistic thought, being able to see the big picture thinking, pattern recognition, and then things like compassion, nurturing, care, okay? Ethics, to a large extent. And I would say ethical thinking comes from a balance between the two, as we're going to get into. Now, if this left part of the brain here becomes chronically dominant, the masculine part of the brain, and again, I'm putting these symbols here. This is an ancient archetypal symbol called the blade. It's a simple upward pointing triangle. And this downward pointing triangle is another ancient archetypal symbol that was referred to in the ancient world as the chalice, the cup, etc. Okay? And this was a rudimentary phallic symbol, and this was a rudimentary womb symbol, representing the male and the female, or the masculine and feminine, more accurately, components of the consciousness. The idea is to keep a balance between these two. When we have a balance between the two, that's when we're operating on all cylinders, so to speak. That's when real consciousness and pattern recognition is developed. And that's when real morality and ethical considerations are also created within the personality, within the being. If this part of the brain is chronically dominant, the left part of the brain, okay, what happens is the right side of the brain is imbalanced. It's not really functioning at a higher level, okay? And the limbic brain will actually suffer that effect, okay? It will also start to shut down. So you will have a lot of left brain patterns going on and a lot of left brain processing going on. But if that's all that's happening and we're not using this part of the brain equally, the R complex of the brain is what essential executive functions are going to be routed to. We're going to be living from the R complex in a kind of stimulus response only mode instead of living from a holistic brain balanced mode, which is when we're in that balanced state, the neocortex, which governs higher order thinking and makes higher order thinking and ethical thinking possible, is what rules the personality. Okay? Now, conversely, if the right side of the brain is chronically dominant, so let's put it this way. The left side of the brain being chronically dominant, you have the controller. That's the master mentality. The right side of the brain being chronically dominant, that's the slave mentality. That's the I won't stand up for myself and I'll just accept everything. The total new ager, in other words. Okay? So this part of the brain, if it's chronically dominant, the opposite happens with the structures of the brain. The R complex will shut down. It will suffer. Okay? It will not work properly, which the R complex is necessary. It makes you stand up for yourself when you're under attack. Again, it's the fight-flight response. In a dangerous situation, you've got to know whether you're going to fight whatever's attacking you or whether you're going to get out of dodge and run away. Okay? That's a survival mechanism that's necessary when there's danger. So when this part of the brain is chronically imbalanced, the R complex gets shut down, people freeze essentially, and they don't stand up for themselves and take action. What's happening is they're being ruled by their emotions. And again, the limbic brain governs all emotions, positive and negative. So that's compassion and that's fear. It's any possible human emotion. The midbrain is what's ultimately facilitating that emotion in the physiology. All right? So if this part of the brain is chronically dominant, the opposite happens. You go into slave think, you shut down, you freeze, you're ruled by the emotions, and you don't stand up for yourself. So, the neocortex of the brain has two hemispheres. The left brain largely facilitates logic and scientific thought, while the right brain hemisphere largely facilitates creativity and compassion. When both hemispheres are in balance, the neocortex acts in its proper role as the executive command center of the whole human brain. And that's when true intelligence is born. Now, true intelligence is a concept that I think more people really have to understand. People have equated intelligence with intellect, especially in the Western society. All right? Intellect is not intelligence. Let me say that again. Intellect is not intelligence. Intelligence comprises more than intellect. Intellect is left brain understanding. True intelligence is holistic understanding, with the right brain included in the process. The nurturing, compassionate, creative, and intuitive sides of the consciousness together with the intellectual aspect of the consciousness. And you can see this in the word. Intelligence. Right? Intella is where intellect comes from. Okay? And gens, G-E-N-C-E, comes from the Latin verb generare. Generare means to generate or to create. So it's the creative aspect of the personality, or the right brain. So intellect plus creativity, logical thinking plus nurturing and compassion. That's real intelligence, holistic intelligence. And most people in our society are not in holistic intelligence. They're in one form of brain imbalance or the other. So let's look at how this manifests. If a human brain's left brain hemisphere becomes chronically dominant, the R complex will take over executive function of the brain, and the person will become ruled by selfishness and base desires. And they will develop a personality that is based in domination and control. Conversely, if a human being's right brain hemisphere becomes chronically dominant, the limbic system will take over executive function of the whole brain, and the person will become ruled by their own emotions and develop a personality that is based in submissiveness and naivete. Okay? The slave think mentality. The schism of the individual. Okay? And this is critical, because this is not only a schism within the individual consciousness, it's a schism of worldview, of the way we view ourselves in the world and the way we view our relationship to others in the world. So I call this the mental schism. And it highlights basically what will happen, what kinds of thinking will manifest when certain types of brain imbalance are present. So when we're in this schism, and again, most of humanity is, if we're overly intellectualizing everything and we're too much in the masculine hemisphere of the brain, okay, we're not using the right or intuitive capacities of the brain, the right brain hemisphere. What this can lead to in the world is, again, rigid skepticism. Now, what did we say about that? It's not conducive to learning. People aren't really going to learn when they're rigidly skeptical. This is a hallmark of scientism. Scientismists, I don't know what other thing to call it, worshippers of the altar of scientism, okay? They have this rigid skepticism because they're purely intellectual. They're not really intelligent. The creative aspect is missing from their personality makeup, okay? Atheism is a hallmark of overly dominant left brain thinking, because that, shuns all aspects of spiritual reality. There is no spirit. The universe is a grand cosmic accident. From there you get things like solipsism. People will say, well, isn't solipsism purely left brain? No. It is right brain. I'm sorry. Is it purely right brain? And I say no, it is left brain imbalance as well. Solipsism can be generated from both forms of imbalance, of believing nothing can actually be known. There is no truth. Truth is a dirty word to many left-brain individuals. You'll note. So solipsism plays into left-brain imbalance as well. All of these states here inevitably lead to these things down here. Moral relativism comes next. The idea that there's no such thing as the difference between right and wrong, that we just get to make those things up. They don't exist inherently in nature, We just can decide on what's right and what's wrong for ourselves and make it up, randomly. So very, very dangerous ideology, which we're going to be talking about a lot. Social Darwinism inevitably comes after that, all right? This is the idea that a certain class of society can get to direct how the lives of everybody else will go because they're the intelligentsia, so-called, okay? Or the intellectual people, really is what it is, the over-intellectualizing. And we'll direct society because we're the fittest. Like Darwinism postulates the survival of the fittest, well, social Darwinism postulates the survival of the most socially ruthless. And many people believe that's the natural order. They believe that's the natural order, and nothing could be farther from the truth. What that is it's the psychopathic chaos. It has nothing to do with nature, and it has nothing to do with order. It's the exact opposite. So, this state, and these are hallmarks of dark occultism as well. Okay? I think I should know a thing or two about it, as I was a priest in it for almost 10 years. I might know a couple of things about Satanism. Okay? So, moral relativism is one of the big tenets of Satanism. It's actually one of the pillars of Satanism. Social Darwinism is highly praised and valued in Satanism. And eugenics. Okay? Because if people don't understand what eugenics is basically people, who have gone so deep into this form of left-brain imbalance that they believe they're God and they can get to decide who lives and who dies. That's really what it is. We will control who breeds and who does not get to breed, who gets to live and who does not get to live. All right? That's essentially eugenics in a nutshell. And again, these are all authoritarianism, forms of authoritarianism. Okay? And it's the idea that man is the author. Man is the creator. Man is the God. Man will make the law. Man will decide who, life and death at any given moment. We will decide what's right and wrong, etc. That's essentially what all of these forms of thought are. Extreme left-brained imbalance. And I was there. I was in this state in my life. I was in it for years. For years. All right? Let's look at the other form of imbalance. If the right side of the brain is chronically dominant, this leads to, similar kind of imbalance, but in the exact opposite form. The brain is still completely imbalanced, therefore the person's not in a high state of consciousness. They're completely unconscious to what's really going on within them and around them. But the manifestation is generally the opposite of the left brain forms of imbalance. So if you're in real right brain imbalanced state of consciousness, this will lead to naivete, believing anything you're told, accepting things from quote-unquote official channels and official sources without actually checking into them for yourself. Blind belief. You'll believe the next religion that comes along. We just have to tell them what they want to hear, and I'll believe that. So, New Agers are basically in this category. Naivete and blind belief. People who trust government, of course, are in that category, because again, it's about creating the masters and the slaves. That's what brain imbalance is for. And that's why the controllers want to propagate this imbalance and keep it in place. Again, religious extremism, that's hallmarks of right brain belief, right brain imbalance. Solipsism, no such thing as truth, all from right brain imbalance as well. Feelings of unworthiness, self-loathing, accepting orders from other people, being an order follower. We're going to have a whole section on order followers later, and how this is the exact opposite of anything virtuous. For people that believe order following is some kind of a virtue, I don't know what to tell you, but it's the thing that leads to all evil in the world, is accepting somebody's orders and not actually gauging for yourself whether the activity, the behavior is moral or not. Okay? And it creates a willing slave. This form of imbalance is ultimately generating a willing slave, whereas this form of imbalance is ultimately generating a psychopathic master. And they're all forms of mind control. It's just another aspect of how mind control works. The propagators of mind control are just doing this to keep that imbalance present in one form or another. They don't even care which it is. As long as they have some that are imbalanced toward one direction and some imbalanced toward the other direction, that's how the dynamic plays off against itself. And you have a world that is continued to be kept under lockdown. So let's look at the worldview schism that goes hand in hand with the brain schism or the mental schism. And again, worldview is exactly what it says. How do you view the world? How do you view yourself in it? How do you view others in it? Well, when there's chronic left brain dominance, the worldview that emerges is one of randomness. And again, this is a hallmark of scientism. The world is this grand cosmic accident. All right? The whole universe is a grand accident. There's no purpose. Right? There's no creator. Everything just magically manifested on its own for no reason from a single singularity, a single point in space-time for no reason. You give me that one, and I'll tell you everything else that happened after that. But you got to give me that one, you know? And I have some bridges to sell you, you know? So, you know, there's no underlying intelligence in nature. Nature is dead. That's what this worldview is about. Nature is dead. It's a dead thing. It's a mechanized machine that is there for no reason. Okay? There's no such thing as the spirit at all. No such thing as spiritual dimension. No such thing as natural law, certainly. Because for one to accept natural law, well, where does it come from? You know, I ask people like whether they accept that natural law exists or that, you know, there's actual objective truth and morality, and like 2/3 of people don't accept it. They don't believe that it exists. They don't think there is objective reality and objective truth and objective morality. You know, they think it's all relative and we get to make it up. I've actually done a psychological, small psychological profiling or study, you know, just asking people this question at random and collecting results and analyzing them. We're at about 2/3 of people who are moral relativists and believe that truth is relative also, that it's not objective. Okay? Now, you ask the same people, do you believe in karma? 88, almost 90% of people believe karma is real and it exists. So I'm like, I can't believe this. You're going to tell me that there's no such thing as a real difference between right and wrong. They're constructs in the human mind is what they think. Right? And simultaneously holding in their mind the idea that karma exists. Well, I asked them the question, what put karma in place then? You believe it exists. What force created it? What made it? What put it in place? And they have no answer for that. You know, they intuitively believe karma exists, but can't answer where did it come from? Because that would involve a creator. And somebody in left brain imbalance can't acknowledge that. You know? So, to a left brain imbalanced person, there's no such thing as spiritual or natural law. It doesn't exist. As a matter of fact, all of existence has no purpose other than to continue its existence. See, survival is the highest aspiration to a left brain imbalanced individual. Right and wrong have no bearing. There's no point in even discussing it. Okay? Because right's what's right for me if I'm super left brain imbalanced. Wrong is whatever affects me negatively. Okay? It doesn't matter what's actually moral. Okay? It's all subjective to a left brain imbalanced individual. And to them, nothing has any purpose. Since it's all a grand cosmic accident, how could there be a purpose for existence? Without a creator, who's going to create the purpose for it? You know? So it has no purpose other than to continue surviving. And again, that's right there is proof they're in the R complex, they're in the base brain. Survival is the highest goal. Survival is the only aspiration. Now, in Satanism, it's about as left brain imbalanced as it gets, folks. You know what their number one law is? Survival. Survival is the highest law. Okay, and we hear about this in Darwinism too. The ultimate purpose of the being is to continue to survive. I would highly debate that. I would highly disagree with that. There are laws higher than survival. Okay? But in Satanism, they simply refer to it as self-preservation. And that means preservation of systems of belief as well. Systems that are serving the self, the egoic self, they must continue to survive. Self-preservation as the highest law. That's the number one tenet of Satanism. And it doesn't matter who you need to step on to do it, who you need to step on to get one up on somebody else. This is extreme left-brain imbalance worldview. All of these characteristics in the randomness worldview are hallmarks of scientism, atheism, totalitarianism, and dark occultism. You could add to that list. Whether you refer to it as Satanism, dark Luciferianism, it doesn't make a difference. It's the hallmarks of the dark occult. On the other side, on the right brain imbalanced side of the worldview, there's another worldview called determinism. Okay, determinism is based in right brain imbalance and is defined by, in general, helplessness, religiosity, and the dismissal of free will. This worldview will eventually lead to a society of blind order followers and willing slaves who accept their conditions as their lot in life. So, hallmarks of deterministic worldview. God controls every event in creation. Nothing happens at random. There is no free will. So you can never throw anything a curveball through free will. Every event is preordained. Okay? And religionists believe in this. See, I like to say, my presentation is going to piss everybody off. And that's what it should do. Because if you're in one of these forms of belief systems, it represents one form of imbalance or another. So people who believe in government and science are in that left brain imbalance. They're going to get pissed off that I'm talking about that form of imbalance. And then the people who are in religion and the New Age movement, they're in that right form of imbalance, so they're going to get pissed off at that. Good. Let them all be pissed off. The truth will piss you off, and then it will set you free if you accept it. So, all occurrences are preordained. Free will is an illusion. Now, you know who just said this in his latest book? Stephen Hawking, who you would think is the most left-brain person that you could think worships at the altar of scientism, believes the universe is a grand accident, okay, and a mechanized machine, okay? It's like this comes full circle. It feeds off of each other like a feedback loop, these forms of imbalance. He went so far through left brain imbalance, he's so in the left brain, that he actually developed the hallmark of right brain imbalance, which is that there's no such thing as free will. No such thing. Since it's all a mechanized machine and there's no consciousness, there can actually be no choice. We are actually robots controlled by matter. Hawking believes this. He actually wrote this in his book. He said free will is as dead as God. Okay? And millions of people buy this moron's books, and I'll call him a moron right to his face. There's not a drop of intelligence in that man, and people think he's one of the most intelligent people in the world. You might be one of the most overly intellectual people in the world, but you have no wisdom at all. Zero, if that's how you think. And again, put him in front of me and I'll tell it to him to his face. Okay? Because these people actually believe he's smart. That person isn't smart. He's dumb. He's intellectual, but that doesn't make you intelligent. Okay? He has no part of the big picture. None. Just because you can theorize something and visualize it and calculate it mathematically does not make you an intelligent person. That means you're great at using the intellect. You're great at mathematics. You're great at linear and logical thinking. That does not make you wise. All right? So, to continue with the right-brained imbalanced worldview, since God controls everything in creation, nothing is possible to change. Human beings are powerless to create change. Everything is being made to be this way by God. This is what religionists and right-brain imbalanced people think. So, therefore, why take any action? Action is ultimately meaningless. A big hallmark of the New Age community, because it's a religion. The Course in Miracles. Oh, we just need to accept everything the way that it is, right, folks? Doesn't make a difference if evil is running amok in our midst. No, accept it all. Don't try to change a damn thing. Take no action, just observe. And see how far deeper that gets you into bondage. Because that's the best way to get real deeper into chains. Okay? So these are all hallmarks of religious extremism and what I call simply slave think, because that's what it is. Let's not euphemize anything. Let's call them what it really is. This is master think, that's slave think. And if you want a world that continues to propagate slavery, you'll stay in one of those forms of brain imbalance. And this right brain imbalance, in addition to religious extremism and slave think, is the hallmark of the New Age movement and their followers, their religious followers. Now, there's a balance that is struck between these, okay? And that's what everything really is ultimately about, creating a balance. Because there are components to these two worldviews that if they come together, it shows us what the truth is. And here it is right in the middle here. There is a deterministic component to reality, and there is a random component to reality, existing in cooperation with each other, in conjunction with each other. The deterministic component is what I'm talking about here today and referring to under the banner of natural law. That is determined. It is law. It is set. You're not changing it. It works that way flawlessly 100% of the time. That's determined. Natural law is determined. Okay? It's the deterministic component to reality. Then there is a randomness component to reality that works continuously in conjunction with natural law. And this is a little thing called free will. Our ability to choose our behaviors, to do certain things and to not choose to do certain things. And we have it. Every individual has it, no matter what position, no matter what situation they're in. I don't care what institution you're in. I don't care who you've listened to up to this point. I don't care what background you come from. I don't care what economic class you come from. Every single solitary being that is capable of thinking at all is gifted with free will. You have free will to choose your behaviors, and so does every other human being. Everyone. Okay? It's a gift of creation itself. Okay, we can choose what we will do and not do. Nobody can actually make anybody do something like a robot. Oh, believe me, there's people who are trying. You know, like Art talked about, Jose Delgado. Was searching for means to electronically, directly control through chip implants and stimulus through chip implants in the brain, human behavior, like a robot, to put a technology into the brain to control the behavior of the individual. And that went on right here. This is where that took place, folks, right on Yale's campus, okay? Read some of his stuff. You want to be disturbed? You think what I'm telling you is somewhat disturbing. Read some of Delgado's material. He was telling people, we're going to show you that free will doesn't exist. We're going to show you there's no such thing as rights, that we make up what rights are. The ruling class makes up what a right and a wrong is. We tell you what it is, and you have no choice. And he was telling you, we're going to show you you have no rights, that you're our slaves. Yeah, read some of his material. And an excellent book Art recommended too, Jim Keith, Mass Control, The Engineering of Human Consciousness. If you haven't read that book, get it and read it. And that's just an introduction. And many people think he was murdered over it. You know, so truth lies in the middle of these worldviews. There's a deterministic component called natural law. There's a random component called free will, our ability to choose our behavior freely. So let's look at this debate that's been going on since time immemorial of human nature versus human nurture. And again, I'm getting ready to piss everybody off, okay? This debate's been going on forever. Which is it? What's human nature really look like? What's its essence? Is it angelic or demonic? Okay? I would say it's neither. It's neither one of these things. It's not both. It's neither. So nobody wins here, you know, who falls on one side or the other. And it's a very difficult thing for people to accept as well. Because when we ask the question, what is the nature of a human being? It's a very similar question to asking, what is the nature of this computer up on this platform? What is the nature of that projector? What is the nature of those cameras? Well, can I actually say what the nature of these things is? It's a computer. Its nature is to compute information. What is the nature of that projector? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it angelic? Is it demonic? Is that projector demonic? No. Its nature is that it projects imagery. What is the nature of these cameras? They capture imagery. That's all. So what's the nature of a human being? The nature of a human being is that it takes in information, it processes it, and then it outputs it through behavior. And as we're going to see, that's very much like a computer. I'm not saying that it is a computer, I'm saying it's like one. Okay? So human nature is neither inherently good nor inherently evil, as many people think fall on one side of this argument or the other. Instead, we should consider the operating conditions or the environment in which human beings exist, which influences behavior to a great extent, thus creating the current human condition. That's why it's called the human condition. It's not called, the situation we're in is called the human condition. It's not called the human nature, okay? It's called the human condition. There's a reason it's called a condition. For any condition to be in place, well, hey, what condition is my computer in right now? What condition is my projector in? What position is Richard's cameras in? They're in operating conditions. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing because they've been kept up in good condition. Okay? In the example of my computer, it has a working operating system without malware on it. Okay? It has software that does the job, that does what I'm asking it to do properly without bugs. Okay? Those are the conditions. The operating conditions will determine how does it perform. What kind of output can it put out into the world? All right? So, again, what I'm saying here is that human beings are like computers. Not that they are computers. Let me just state that emphatically. We're not computers. We're like computers. Okay? We are programmable. That's the nature of a human being. How many people have ever heard anybody say that the nature of a human being is that a human being is programmable? To my knowledge, I'm the only person or researcher that is calling that human nature. Our nature is that we can be programmed. And there's another thing, that's another thing people don't want to hear. They don't want to hear this because they liken it to a mechanized machine. And I'm not saying, again, to emphasize, I'm not saying we are computers. I'm saying we're like them in the ways that we can be programmed. So what gets put into a person through the environment, which is called the culture, all right, and becomes their programming, determines what they will output onto the screen, which is called human life. And that will create the human condition in the aggregate as more and more people operate that way. All right, so let's look at how this works. Human beings are programmable much like computers. Like a computer, if a human being has a bad file system format, that's the first thing you do when you're going to get ready to use a computer. You have to format the drive. How many people here are somewhat techie? Not many. Okay, about a quarter to a third. All right. So some people will know what I'm talking about here. For the others, excuse the jargon for a moment. All right, I'll explain what it is. A file system format is you got to format the hard drive so you can prepare it for a specific operating system, which is basically the task controllers. It's going to control what happens on the computer, how programs get launched, how memory is used, etc. in a nutshell. All right, I do this for a living, so I know all the technical stuff. So I'll try to keep it simple. So if the human being has a bad file system format, right? This is akin to the operating conditions during a child's formative years, the first 6 years of their life, essentially. Now, think about it. We call this their formative years. Their formative years, like a format on a hard drive, because this is what puts the file system into the human being, that prepares it for its operating system. Okay, so Largely, what programs the child at this stage is the parents and what they will see in their immediate environment and home and during their very early years in, quote, schooling. All right? Now, if, like a computer, if a human being also has a bad operating system, now this is like Mac OS, Windows, Linux, etc. Android, iOS, these are operating systems. Again, they are basically providing a platform that other programs will run in, and they're providing a graphical user interface. This is your culture. The operating system is the culture in which the programs run, okay? So let's say if you have a bad operating system, meaning you're already surrounded in a bad environment, in a bad culture, right? That's also going to negatively impact the output. And then they have bad software programs. Now, these are the programs that you run. Now, if I didn't have a good presentation piece of software, my presentation might come out sloppy. It might crash in the middle of it. It might not display the graphics or the text properly, okay? So you got to make sure you're working with good, reliable software as well. Now, what the software is the belief systems, what the person has taken into the mind and is processed and made part of themselves. And now, if all of those things are bad, we have three bad components. The format is bad, the file system format, which is the formative years of the child, okay? The culture is bad, meaning they're already growing up in a bad culture or in a culture that condones moral relativism, etc., and doesn't understand natural law. And the software programs that have been input into the child are bad, meaning their belief systems, okay? What do you think the output of that, quote, computer is going to be like? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be chaotic? If I screw up my system's hard drive format, if I put an operating system that is like at alpha state and it's not ready for prime time because the development's not finished, it's half-baked, okay? And then I load crappy software that's full of bugs and the developers didn't really care about programming them correctly. Do you think that computer is going to operate properly and give me the output on the screen I'm looking for, or output on the printout I'm looking for, or output on the internet that I'm looking for? Good luck. If you know a little bit about computers, you're laughing now because it would be ridiculous to assume that it could do that. Well, why do we think that we're going to have that in our environment when all of these things are badly programmed? See, the output onto the screen is also going to be horrible if all those three things, that determine how the system works are also bad. So it will contribute to deteriorating conditions on a mass scale. Like a computer, the behavior of a human being largely depends upon its programming. And its programming is the quality of the information that is being input into it. The quality of the information it's taking in. The quality of the information it's taking in is going to determine the quality of the information it's outputting, like any other computer. So if garbage goes in, surprise, garbage is going to come out. If good information goes in, quality will come out. And the output will be as one wants it to be. It will be able to process and create efficiently, effectively, not chaotically. Here's a very simple diagram. Again, if people understand it, they really get how natural law functions. And again, it's very unpopular. People don't want to look at what the bottom base foundation or platform of this structure is. Because once again, this idea that knowledge is what's required makes many people upset because they want to believe they're going to achieve these things they say they want without doing the work to acquire that knowledge and therefore understand the requirements for obtaining those conditions. So we start with available information. And when people look at what I'm going to describe here, they will recognize it as something. And I'll hold what that is for a moment. Available information is what you're starting with. This constitutes potential knowledge, and it can become knowledge if it's taken in, if it's amassed, if it's aggregated, okay? It can be gathered, it can be processed, it can be understood, and then it can be acted upon. You could call this the grammar stage of this three-part process I'm going to explain, Okay? You could also refer to this as the input stage. If we're looking at it in a computer model, this is the stage of inputting information or programming something. Okay? Now the next step that's built upon this is once you've taken information in, necessary information, you then come to a position of understanding it. You know what it means, you recognize the patterns. All right? So this is the second step in this process. Now, your understanding or lack of understanding, okay, now in the first stage, your knowledge or lack of knowledge is going to lead to understanding or lack of understanding. If you have understanding present, your decision-making processes are going to be in harmony with what you say you want, okay? You're going to understand, if here's what I want, this is what's necessary to get that, to make that happen, to manifest it. That's understanding. It's a decision-making process that happens within the mind. These processes take place in the human mind and are chosen by each individual based upon available information. So again, you can see if information is held back, if it is occulted, or even if it's just people are dissuaded from taking it in because people will say, no, there's nothing there, there's nothing to it, right? You could see how they'll never get to this step. They'll never understand. They'll never get to the second level of creating our reality. All right? Effectively, efficiently. The third stage to this process is what you do with what you have come to understand, to know and understand. So this is the action stage. Okay? Each individual's behavior, the behaviors that they choose through their own free will, is based upon the quality of their decision-making processes that are happening within the human mind. Okay? That process, as we've already seen, is in return based upon the quality of available information. So this is behavior. See, people don't think of wisdom as behavior. They don't think of wisdom as action. They think of it as something that you just know. No, wrong. Wisdom is not knowledge or understanding. Wisdom is action. Let me say this again. Wisdom is action. It is knowledge and understanding that has been applied. Application. That's the program that you're going to run on the computer that you've put an operating system on and formatted properly. The application is the action. When you're working in a computer doing things, you're working in an application. You're not building the things you're building with the operating system. The operating system is what's supporting the program that allows you to be creative. Okay? And in return, the file format supports the operating system. So, we start with available knowledge. That can be converted in available information, which can be converted into knowledge, which can then, through decision-making processes and filtering of that information to eliminate inconsistencies, can lead to an understanding. In continuation, the understanding can then lead through our free will decision-making processes to be converted into behavior, into action in the world. That, when it's done properly, it's wisdom. When it's done with morality and ethics in mind, it's wisdom. When it's done without that, it's folly. Okay? And it leads to more and more chaos. So, based upon these three processes, something is generated. Something is created in the physical manifestation, physically manifested reality, the real world, so to speak. So, the manifested reality is based upon the aggregate behavior. Aggregate behavior. No one person is creating the reality we are experiencing. Okay? It's another fallacy of the New Age movement and thinking. In the aggregate, we are creating our shared reality. All the behaviors put together creates the output on the screen, or the generated result. Is it orderly? Is it chaotic? Well, that's going to be based upon whether someone took in the information, processed it efficiently to come to an understanding, and then acted upon it. The manifested reality is the quality of the condition which manifests in any given society based upon the aggregate quality of human behavior within that society. This is how our reality is actually created. The conditions that we experience as the daily events of our life. It's a simple 3-stage process that leads to a result. And for many people here, you will recognize, if you've looked into this discovery process and this creative process, is known as the trivium. This is what the trivium is. Okay? In the ancient traditions, this is what the trivium was labeled. It was labeled knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. In the later aspects, when they passed out of mystery school tradition hands and went into some other think tank and society hands, the knowledge of the trivium was termed grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Grammar being the knowledge stage of aggregating available information, logic being the understanding stage of making using processes to analyze and filter said information and come to an understanding of it. And then the rhetoric stage was the application, the action, taking action based upon what you've come to understand. Now, there's a third way of looking at the trivium in computer jargon, and that is input, processing, and output. And then you get the result on the screen, which is called life. All right? Any way you want to look at the trivium, I don't care. But understand it, know how it works. Okay? Because this is why a big part of why we're in the situation that we're in is that the trivium methodology of truth discovery has been completely obliterated from public consciousness. Completely obliterated. And I ask people how many people have even ever heard the word trivium. Raise your hand if you've heard the word. So a good portion of the people here have. Many people have never heard the word. And if you do a Google search on it, most people are going to get back the band, the metal band, the trivium, which is not a bad band, but, you know, but the whole point here is the results that are going to come back through Google or Bing or Yahoo or whatever are going to give you a metal band, a heavy metal band, instead of the trivium method of learning, the classical liberal arts education methodology. Because they want to try to sanitize that as much from human consumption as possible. They don't even want you to understand how that works at all. And that's why it's been removed from public schooling. And that's why, as long as this society stays the way it is, it'll never be put back into public schooling. You know, I tell people a little anecdote. When I was in high school, and thank God I went to the high school I did because they really hammered Latin and Greek into you. You were going to know your Latin and Greek when you came out of my high school, okay? For whatever other indoctrination they put into you, that's a different story. But I'll tell you what, you came out of there knowing your ancient languages. You know, it was still part of the curriculum when I was in high school. And, you know, again, I think I came out better out of there because of simply the linguistics knowledge that I gained from it. And we read Gaius Julius Caesar's war journals in their original Latin and translated them. And in one of them, he's absolutely lambasting one of his centurions. Okay, they're on a campaign in Gaul, which is France now. And Caesar is, you know, making his rounds of his troops, and they're getting ready to, you know, push deeper into Gaul. And he finds, you know, when they would have their encampments, they would have a lot of, you know, slaves of the Roman Empire that they would take with them on their campaigns that would do a lot of the lifting of the equipment and the carrying of the equipment for the centurions to do battle in the next battlefield location. And the slaves would have to do all that manual labor. And Caesar says to one of his centurions, he's passing by their encampment, and he sees one of the actual centurion leaders teaching one of the slaves the trivium method. And he flips out on him in this journal. He says, I caught one of my centurions, you know, teaching the trivium, and freaks out on him. How dare you teach a slave our method of learning? Soon they won't want to be a slave anymore. There'd be an uprising if they knew what we knew, if they knew our truth discovery methodology. He said, I forget how it really ended, but I think how it ended was he told this centurion, if I ever catch you doing this again, I will personally cast you into the wilderness of Gaul and let the Gaulians deal with you, who knew that the Roman Empire was trying to conquer their people at that point, which is basically saying it would be a death sentence, but I won't even carry it out. I'll let our enemy carry it out on you. That's how much he didn't want their slaves to understand their methodology for learning. And that's the trivium. And that's why most people have never heard the word. So you got to look into it and understand how it works. That's all I can say about it. It is how we build our reality, either efficiently or destructively. So let's look at some of the principles of natural law. Now, in my extended seminar, which goes over a 6-week class of lessons, I get into these principles deeply in an extended form. We're not going to do that today because time doesn't allow. I'm going to briefly touch on each one. Okay? The word principles, let's define it. Principle comes from the Latin noun principia. Principia means first, foremost, leading, chief, or most necessary. It is that which matters most. It is the first things that must be understood before anything else can be understood. Principles have to come first. And this is the problem. Our society does not put principles first. It puts trivialities first, and we're no longer a society that even cares about principles or first things. So first things first. First things or principles have to come first. So let's look at what the principles that underlie natural law. These are the things that are most important. That's what principles should mean to people. If we ask people to define what a principle is, first thing they should say, that's the most important thing. The most important thing in my life. Now, when in the natural law seminar, we did a homework assignment. We asked people what the most important thing was to them. Very few responded with principles. Most people responded with saying that people or the family was the number one response. The familial connection was more important to them than principles. Now, when people hear me say that that's backwards, they'll say, how cold are you? That's so cold, okay? What I'm telling you is that the familial connection, no matter what it is, between a mother and a son, a mother and a daughter, a father and a son, father and a daughter, husband and wife, doesn't matter as much as principles. I'm not telling you they don't matter at all. I'm telling you you have to put principles first. Otherwise, those relationships are just meaningless. They don't really have any real value unless they're based upon principles first, which is why so many relationships are dysfunctional. Principles have to come first before you can even build a solid relationship with another human being. So, let's look at what some of the principles of how natural laws work first before we can actually find out what the expressions of these laws are in our lives, which will be the next section. These are what I call the general principles of natural law. Natural law is expressed through 7 basic underlying principles, plus what I have referred to as an 8th or hidden principle, which you hear very few other researchers, even people